South China Sea, an armed attack on the Philippines' armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft in the South China Sea would invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments. And that is an unwavering commitment that we have to the Philippines.
From the nation's capital, all sides, all the time, I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Maricel Halili. The big story tonight.
Security, economy, climate change, job creation, and renewable energy. These were the topics discussed by President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in a bilateral meeting with U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris today.
During the first day of her visit, Harris reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to fulfilling the Mutual Defense Treaty with regard to the issue on the West Philippine Sea. The details in my report. After landing in the Philippines on Sunday night, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris visited Malacanang and paid a courtesy call to President Bongbong Marcos. VP Harris was welcomed with arrival honors. She also signed the palace guest book. The U.S. second-in-command was then introduced to cabinet members. VP Harris reaffirmed the United States' commitment to support the Philippines, particularly on the issue in the West Philippine Sea.
An armed attack on the Philippines' armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft in the South China Sea would invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments. And that is an unwavering commitment that we have to the Philippines.
VP Harris will also visit Palawan on Tuesday to meet the Philippine Coast Guard and locals in the area. She will be the highest U.S. official to visit the province nearest to the disputed waters. President Marcos made things light by commenting on Harris' visit to Palawan.
I suppose you actually are doing that because you're seeing some of the prettiest parts of the Philippines in Palawan.
Yes.
And I'm sure you're just going to the resorts and the beaches.
That is not the life I've chosen these days.
Aside from mutual concerns on security, the two leaders also discussed economy, climate change, job creation, and renewable energy. VP Harris also earlier announced that the U.S. and Philippines will have a civil nuclear cooperation agreement in relation to having zero-emission energy. Before a visit to Malacanang, VP Harris met with her Philippine counterpart, Vice President Sara Duterte, at the Aguado House. Harris is the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit the Philippines so far in 5 years. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
Meanwhile, here are some of the stories from the APEC summit over the weekend. APEC member states issued a joint declaration strongly condemning the war in Ukraine. The joint declaration states that most APEC members are against Russia's aggression. Others called for an assessment on its impact on the global economy. For his part, President Bongbong Marcos called for peace and diplomatic discussions. He said that war is unacceptable.
In a bilateral meeting with President Bongbong Marcos, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said his government will shoulder the unpaid salaries of OFWs affected by construction companies that went bankrupt in 2015 to 2016. In the same meeting, Saudi's labor minister also vowed to ensure proper compensation for Filipino workers moving forward. Meanwhile, President Marcos also offered an explanation over his agreement with China about, quote, rejecting acts of bullying in relation to the South China Sea. Marcos said that the Philippines and the rest of the ASEAN should not allow anyone else dictate the future of the region. That's why the president believes that summits are important so that the region can come to a common position about important issues.
To share his insights about the impact of President Bongbong Marcos' latest meetings on foreign policy and relations, we have with us Renato de Castro, International Affairs Analyst from De La Salle University. He is joining us live via Zoom. Good evening, Professor de Castro. Welcome once again to The Big Story.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Buti naman po. Sir, your thoughts first on Vice President Kamala Harris' trip to the Philippines, and one particular question. Over the weekend, you heard President Marcos and President Xi Jinping saying that we are against bullying in any arena. Was President Marcos and President Xi Jinping using bullying in the same context, especially given his discussions as well with Vice President Kamala Harris?
Okay, let me start first with the visit of Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, again, as mentioned earlier, this is the highest, she's the highest ranking U.S. government official that visited the country since, of course, we have this new administration. This is an indication, of course, that the United States is giving importance to the bilateral alliance with the Philippines. Of course, given also the apparent change in the Ferdinand Marcos administration's relation with the United States. Now, we notice a degree of warmness, cordiality, in terms of reviving this, this overall bilateral relations with the United States. Going back to when we were talking about the statement of Xi Jinping, I guess we have to take into account China has a different interpretation of the word bullying. Of course, the standard definition of bullying is a big guy or a big power pulling its weight against a smaller country. That is not the case of China. Remember, during the Scarborough Shoal incident in 2012, China accused the Philippines of bullying. So any country, whether big or small, resists Chinese expansion or aggression, China will immediately accuse that country of bullying. It has accused Japan of bullying. It has accused Vietnam of bullying. And I will have no doubt that sooner or later, China might even accuse the Vatican of bullying.
Okay, sir, earlier today, Vice President Kamala Harris gave a strong statement about the position or about the issue of the West Philippine Sea. She said to President Bongbong Marcos that if there will be an attack against the Philippines, the mutual defense commitment is always there. Now, how will this statement affect, if there will be any impact, on the relationship of the Philippines and China?
Well, of course, this is a matter of it's a bilateral agreement with, relations with the Philippines. It's our alliance. So actually what Vice President Kamala Harris mentioned is a reiteration of the new formulation of the, American commitment to the MDT, which of course began with Secretary Blinken announcement when Secretary Blinken included the armed forces of the Philippines. Because the standard reiteration of this treaty commitment is any attack on Philippine vessel, air or land, will be considered an attack, invoked. So what has been included under the Biden administration is the inclusion of the armed forces of the Philippines. And what Vice President Harris basically did was to reaffirm that reformulation of the Mutual Defense Treaty. Now, in terms of our relation with China, well, of course, it's a separate issue. We have a territorial dispute with China. Of course, there's concern that sooner or later, you might have armed conflict erupting. So again, what the United States has basically been doing is to reaffirm that the alliance is still there, that we could rely on our alliance relations with the United States.
Professor, you mentioned the meeting with Secretary Blinken over the weekend, meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, now Kamala Harris, all of this preceding a state visit to China again in January. So Mr. Marcos has been meeting with either the United States or China, obviously, as you said, reformulating the foreign policy position of the Philippines. How would you assess how he is staying in the middle and what his options are moving forward?
Of course, the buzzword here is balance. So again, this is a apparent effort on the part of this current administration to show that we are different from the previous administration, which has a different notion of an independent foreign policy. Dropping like a hot potato our traditional ally like the United States and gravitating towards China. That has, of course, been the policy, especially in the early part of the previous administration. Now this administration is basically indicating that we could only exercise independent foreign policy if we have a balanced approach. Balanced approach, of course, entails maintaining our traditional alliance with the United States, our security partnerships with other U.S. allies and like-minded countries like Japan, Australia, and of course South Korea, but at the same time also engaging China in terms of managing the dispute, and also with an expectation that we could avail of the fact that China has the second largest economy in the world.
All right, we'll continue our discussion with Professor Renato de Castro later in the program. For now, we're going to pause for a short break, but after that, we'll talk about the unidentified floating object retrieved along Pag-asa Island that was supposedly taken by force by the Chinese Coast Guard from the AFP. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
DPRK has launched an unprecedented number of ballistic missiles throughout this year and has followed up this morning with the launch of a long-range ballistic missile. This is a grave provocation. The latest launch, together with earlier launches, constitute a clear violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions and a serious threat to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, Asian region, and the whole world.
Canada will continue its participation in joint military operations in the region, including with Operation Neon, to enforce the UN sanctions.
You can be assured of New Zealand's ongoing response and strength of response. We have been a part of upholding the United Nations sanctions against North Korea and in monitoring those sanctions, and will continue to do so.
These unprecedented multiple ballistic missile launches undermine our security. They are reckless actions, and I particularly feel for the people of the Republic of Korea and Japan, who will be deeply concerned by these actions.
We're letting Netflix in, and they are seeing things that otherwise, if you look at the pure sports broadcasting, you wouldn't realize. And that by itself, Formula 1.
You're watching the big story here on One News. The AFP's Western Command said that the Chinese Coast Guard took by force an unidentified floating object that was retrieved along Pag-asa Island. Westcom said that a team from Naval Station Emilio Liwanag retrieved the object, but the Chinese Coast Guard was able to take it from them. The item is suspected to be debris from a Chinese rocket. So far, no one was reported hurt from the incident. Westcom said it is up to the National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea whether to file a protest on the matter.
Still with us to talk about this unidentified object taken by force by the Chinese Coast Guard, it's Professor Renato de Castro. Professor de Castro, welcome once again. Sir, habang hindi pa po malinaw kung ano ba itong bagay na to na pinag-agawan, this reminds us that there will constantly be these repeated and different incidents, constantly reminding us that there is tension in our territory and right outside our territory in the disputed waters of the South China Sea. How will all of these affect everything that President Marcos has been trying to develop and to stabilize between China and, for that matter, the United States?
Well, I don't think we have the entire picture here. No, information are still coming in, so we simply don't see, the whole picture. So I don't want to comment on this matter unless, of course, we have more information coming in. Probably this is an incident that happened at the tactical level. So I don't think we have to give that much significance at this point in time. So I think the best option is just let's wait. until more information comes in.
Apa, that's fair enough. And as we said, tactical level yan, we don't know. But in the big picture, nabanggit din ni President Marcos, Vice President Kamala Harris making a trip to Palawan. They were laughing about it, that basically she was saying, it is not just about a vacation. But a lot of people are, of course, speculating and inevitably asking about the prospects of reopening bases in the Philippines, or at the very least, basing rights for U.S. forces. How will that come into play?
I don't think, I guess you're talking about the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement that will not provide for bases. Bases would entail, of course, permanent positioning of foreign forces. That I don't think will happen. Because what we will have would be EDCA sites. EDCA sites are bilateral arrangements. You will have probably Americans constructing certain facilities that will be of dual use for the armed forces of the Philippines and, of course, the armed forces of the United States. But after, of course, the agreement expires, those facilities will, of course, be, become property of the armed forces of the Philippines. So I still remember the presence of 2 large American bases prior, of course, to November 1992. We won't have that same arrangement here because the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement is totally different from the 1947 Military Bases Agreement, which, of course, provides for permanent U.S. military presence in the Philippines. Of course, permanent meaning that, after the Second World War, up to, of course, the last U.S. Marine left Subic Naval Base in November 1992.
Mm-hmm. Sir, let's talk about the visit of Vice President Kamala Harris to Palawan, like what Robbie mentioned earlier. Do you see this, yung possibility of creating tension, considering that Palawan is the nearest province to the disputed area?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, the situation is already tense. What more can we add? Well, you're just across the Palawan, you have artificial islands created by the Chinese and militarized by the Chinese. And one of them, of course, is Mischief Reef, that the Chinese occupied in 1996. And of course, at that time, they just put wooden structures and assured the Philippines that those wooden structures would be shelters for both Filipino and Chinese fishermen. Now, of course, they are considered as China's Pearl Harbor in the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea. So it's not us that has created the tension. The Chinese military expansion has basically generated this tension.
Okay, maraming salamat po for your time and insights. Professor Renato de Castro, International Affairs Analyst from De La Salle University. And after the break, the camp of suspended Bucor Chief Gerald Bantag finally receives a copy of the subpoena for the preliminary investigations on Wednesday. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
Hardest part for me as somebody being on the organization side of layoffs is that you know that people's lives are at stake, and if you are an empathetic person, which I, for better or worse, am, you can't help but think about the impact that this is going to have on the people who have a job one day and not the next day.
This is Camilla Boyer. She had the misfortune of working at 3 companies in the space of 9 months that did layoffs. While there is definitely not a good way of firing people, there is absolutely a bad way.
There's 3 really important things to bear in mind. First of all, don't fire a mass number of people over Zoom or over email. Don't diminish their contributions to the company. Make sure you're showing gratitude for the time and effort and love, in lots of cases, that people have put into their jobs at that company. It's much harder to trust a leader who isn't capable of owning their own fallibility than it is to trust one who will own up to their mistakes and be willing to kind of take that on board and move forward. Accountability, empathy, closure. It's really important to treat the people who are being laid off with that respect, giving the people impacted a chance to say goodbye, treating them in that human way and not just cutting them off from every system right away goes a long way towards the experience of both the people who are leaving and the people who are remaining in terms of that ability to move on.
Climate change is a very complex issue. If you go deep enough and you learn enough about it, it becomes very personal. When I was young, I was originally a surfer.
You're still watching the big story here on One News. The camp of suspended Bucor Chief Gerald Bantag has received the subpoena for a preliminary investigation set for Wednesday. Bantag's lawyer, attorney Rocky Balisong, went to the DOJ headquarters in Manila to get the document. Let's recall that the subpoenas were deemed served last Tuesday when the process server went to Bantag's house in Caloocan. But no one was there to receive it. Nonetheless, Balisong said they will still study if Bantag will attend the preliminary investigation, depending on the allegations in the complaint that they need to address.
Asahan ng taong bayan na harapin natin yan. Hindi naman kami lalaban sa gobyerno. Kasi ano namang laban namin? Lalaban kami sa katotohanan. Yun ang attorney namin.
Meanwhile, Justice Secretary Boying Remulla says he could not confirm a report that Bantag's deputy, Superintendent Ricardo Zulueta, had supposedly died. Remulla said the last information he got about Zulueta were his whereabouts.
I will not speculate. I have no news. I have no information.
But do you have information as to where he is?
I had information a week ago on where he was. At least may nagsabi lang sa sources natin.
But do we have tracker teams trying to locate them? We don't have a warrant of arrest.
Our people are working.
The third and final leg of the Toyota Gazoo Racing Vios Cup came to an exhilarating finish as racers competed for the championship. Laila Pangilinan with the details.
It was an exciting finish to the 2022 Toyota Gazoo Racing Vios Cup as the third and final leg of the races were held on Saturday over at the Clark Freeport. Like the previous leg, fans were allowed in attendance to see their favorite racers compete to defend their places or snatch their way to the podium.
So, ang dami nanonood. Yeah, it's really thrilling, nakaka-excite.
Toyota Gazoo Racing is all about pushing the limits for better. So it is the same philosophy that Toyota is applying when creating and manufacturing, engineering what we call ever better cars.
The final leg of the TGR Vios Cup featured 3 circuit championship classes: Super Sporting, Sporting Promotional, as well as Autocross Challenge races. These race events had a mix of seasoned and celebrity racers, along with influencers and members of the media. Team Cebu dominated the promotional class Race 8 lead by Jared Messina.
Our game plan is to win. For me, pushing the limits is always the best because that's where you know how good you are or what your skill set is. And if you go over the limit, then that teaches you to slow down, take a step down, and relax for a bit, and push to your limits all the time.
When it came to the super sporting class, Gerald Lloyd led the way, followed by Brian Co and Inigo Anton.
A lot of training experience has been put down to this. Just always been preparing mentally and also physically.
Meanwhile, over at the Autocross Challenge, which featured celebrity racers, actor and influencers Aaron Villaflor, Miguel Romulo, and Carla Lizardo dominated the event.
Maraming salamat sa Toyota for having us, having me to be part of your family, and somehow I'm gonna use this tool for my future races.
Not gonna end. For me, I'm gonna push myself with all the opportunities sa lahat ng mga races pa na darating.
All the participants were also thankful for the opportunity given to them by Toyota.
We are competing inside the track, but off track we are all friends. We're enjoying the camaraderie and brotherhood.
One of the things that I learned here is how to drive better. Kasi ang daming mga
pasikot-sikot, ganon. Kailangan mo yung marunong ka umiwas sa mga obstacle.
With the 2022 TGR season coming to a close, Toyota officials said a lot can be expected come 2023, not just in the races, but also in its efforts in building the motorsport community in the Philippines.
It's one way for the sport and the activity to be accessible to more people, and that it also builds our community of race and car lovers here in the country.
For News 5, Laila Pangilinan, we are One News.
And that's the big story tonight. For more updates, follow News 5, the Philippine Star, and This is World Online. You may also log on to One News PH for more analysis. I'm Robbie Alampay.
The big story is also available via Signal Play app. Make a free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News anytime, anywhere. I'm Maricel Halili. Stay safe, Philippines.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.